Yeah, cheers, Dave. Thank you for your service. Thanks for everybody else doing service, and yeah, thanks for inviting me to come and speak. Good evening, guys. Nice to see some faces I know, some faces I don't know. My name's Vinny. I'm a grateful recovered addict. Firstly, I just want to say I have spoke on another meeting recently on the weekend, and looks like there's quite a few people here from that one. So apologies that you've been lumbered with me again in such a short space of time. You know, nothing I can do about that. But yeah, I've been in recovery a little while, and by no means way down the road. I'd still class myself as a newcomer as such, because this stuff's it's a marathon, isn't it? It's not a sprint. And there's a long road ahead. Like it says in the book, doesn't it? There's a long period of reconstruction ahead. Um, Growing up, I had a quite a simple family. Wasn't really any major childhood trauma as such. Just the fact that I didn't have a dad in my life growing up. I grew up with my mum, brother, council estate, and that's all I ever knew. My dad was never there. Him and my mum broke up basically way before, basically when I was a baby. He was violent, mentally and physically abusing to my brother and my mum. And he was one of us. He was an alcoholic. Um, and he passed away as a result of this illness. And when I came into recovery, I had massive resentment against my dad because selfishly of me, I was like, well, I didn't have a dad growing up, so forth, so forth. And when I was about 16, that's when he passed away. And it was at that point in my life where I could actually make a decision where I could maybe try and build a relationship with him. And it was at that time where basically he ended up on a life support machine and that opportunity got took away, um, which caused a lot of pain for me. I felt kind of robbed, if that makes sense. Um, Growing up through my teenage years, I was just a normal kid. I was obsessed with football. Anything to do with football, I played at quite a good standard in terms of like getting trials and stuff like that. But between like 13 to 16, my mentality slightly started changing. Obviously, I'm in high school. My friends are going out on the weekends. My friends are going out every night. They're doing this, they're doing that. You're hearing the stories about this has happened, that's happened, and naturally, you're intrigued. Well, I was anyway. I was intrigued to have that experience with it, and go and engage in what everybody else was doing. And it started off like harmless fun, just roaming around the streets, causing a bit of mischief and so forth and so forth. And slowly but surely, um, my drinking and my using started commencing. My first drink that I ever had would have been Frosty Jacks, the big 3 litre bottle of cider. Couple of paper cups from the local chippy. Um, you know, Sony Ericsson speakers stood in a shelter and so forth, throwing bricks at cars and taking chase off the police, and just doing little bits and pieces even there. And when I was in high school, I'm probably just going to bounce around a little bit here, but when I was in high school, I was on the way to school one day, and this is where I was. I'd say I was quite vulnerable at that point because I didn't really have the confidence that maybe other people did, and I was very within myself, and I was very shy and very timid. And I got robbed at knife point. It was only for like £2 or something like that. It was basically my bus fare for the day. But it massively affected me. I didn't dare go out the house. Like I was shook. I was shook from it because I'd never experienced anything like that before in my life. That was just before I was going into high school. And in my mind, I thought, when I get to high school, I'm not going to be that victim anymore. I'm not going to be that guy that gets robbed. I'm going to be the guy that's standing his ground and doing this and doing that. So I think leading throughout my high school years, I had already started putting on that mask which the book talks about, but I'd not really seen it. I was starting to build my stage character of what I thought people wanted to see from me, to mask my true who I truly was. And in all honesty, what I truly was vulnerable. Yeah. I was scared. I was full of fear. I felt like I couldn't fit in. I was worried about what people thought of me. I wanted to know what people thought of me. I wanted to understand their thinking. I wanted to dissect everything. Um, anyway, when my dad passed away, that was what I believe my first valid reason for me to kind of go completely off key. So I started drinking even more, stopped going to football, stopped going to college, and yeah, I was introduced to cocaine. And even though I was knocking about on the streets with the lads and stuff at the time, I still didn't fit. I still felt like I was on the outside looking in, even though that was there. Do you know what I mean? But the moment that I took that first coin, that first key, like like it talks about in the book, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by cocaine or alcohol or whatever that substance is. And the effect that was produced as a result of taking that was something that I'd never experienced before. It was a spiritual experience in itself without me knowing what a spiritual experience was. It put me in a place where I felt like I was on top of the world. I was undefeatable. I could laugh, I could joke, I could take the piss out of people, I could let people take the piss out of me, and I could drink for longer and everything that came with it. Um, what I didn't understand or comprehend at that point, though, is that I wasn't your average temperate user. I didn't know that at the time. So when my mates were going home after a Friday night, I was staying out till Sunday, and they'd be like, "What the fuck? Like, how the fuck are you doing 2, 3 days?" But to me, that just became the normal, and I could never. I remember being there's many people that are still out there that was my friends back then that we used to sit there and say like, "What's wrong with us? Like, why can't we just go home?" And you could never put our finger on it. And when I came into Cocaine Anonymous, someone explained quite quickly to me what I suffer with. And it was at that moment that I knew that I'd found a potential home that I could find a place where I could recover. Um, one of the first questions someone asked me when I came to see her was, if you've got sober Vinny and you've got on it Vinny, which one's your problem? And my natural answer was, it's on it Vinny because he's a wrong un, you know. Goes out for countless days and he ends up in stupid situations and he can't stop and everything and everything and everything. And he said, "Well, yeah, that's true." He said, "But is sober Vinny not really the problem?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you're clean and sober. You know exactly what's going to happen if you take that first one, but you still do it anyway." And immediately it was like the penny drops. My problem isn't cocaine. That was my solution to my problem. My real problem centers in the mind rather than the body. The book talks about, got an analogy of the body, and it says the doctor's theory interests us. Yeah. In the doctor's opinion. And the thing is with the allergy, it's not really the problem, is it? Because I've got an allergy to peanuts and I've lived with that allergy for 35 years and it's never been a problem for me because I've got sane thinking around peanuts. The only time that allergy becomes a problem is when that craving is activated. The real problem is the mental obsession that centers in the mind and the craving that comes with it, meaning that I can't stop once I start. And when I do stop, I get worse. I get worse. I deteriorate mentally. I can't function properly. I'm stood up. I want to be sat down. I'm inside. I want to be outside. And I go on this cycle continuously, continuously, continuously. And it takes me to a place of like it talks about in the book, to the gates of insanity or death. And that's exactly where it took me. That's exactly where it took me. When I come into cocaine anonymous, still a tricky word to say even now that. When I come into CA, I didn't come into CA where I was living on the streets, or I didn't have my family, or I didn't have my kids. I still had all of those things. I had the nice house, I had the nice car, I had the good job, I had everything. Yeah, it took it took everything away from me internally rather than externally. When it talks about that unmanageability in step one, I always used to believe that my life was unmanageable externally, and it did become unmanageable externally. However, the real unmanageability that it's directing me to is the internal unmanageability. So what do I need to do? I need to get a new manager, don't I? Because my management skills have got me into the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous. So I'm not a very good manager, am I? Do you know what I mean? Like, um, so when I came in, I got a sponsor. I started doing the steps, but I'd not fully conceded to my innermost self. I'd surrendered and threw my hands up, and I had a desire to stop, like it talks about, saying the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop. That's the only requirement for me to stop. However, that's not the only requirement for me to stay clean and sober, unfortunately. I've got to do a lot of things alongside that desire. And there's a difference, isn't there, from my experience? Every time I had a use up, and every time the shit hit the fan, and every time that my missus was going to put the house up for sale, and my in-laws couldn't look at me anymore, and every time I ended up in a hospital bed because I was going fucking insane, deranged, it was I always had a desire to stop, but I never had an honest desire until the last day that I used. And when I had that honest desire and I fully conceded to my innermost self, I was all out of ideas. There was no more buts. There was no more maybes. There was no more ifs. There was no more answering back, thinking that I know better than, because I didn't know better than. I thought I knew everything, but I clearly knew nothing. You know, talks about in the book, doesn't it? Destruction of selfishness and self-centeredness. And I always thought that I was quite kind, loving, considerate, asking my wife if she wants a nice bath, some candles, and I'll put some tea on, and you stay in there for an hour whilst I go and smash this eighth in front room, and then we'll talk later. Do you know what I mean? It talks about in the pages on the actor, doesn't it? The actor can be very kind, considerate, even quite virtuous at times. But underneath that, they're incredibly selfish, dishonest, self-seeking. And all of my life and my marriage was based on that. And it was insane to think that I thought I was doing a good job. I thought I was being accountable. Um, so I conceded to myself, and I mentioned this previously at another meeting, and I think it's quite a good way of looking at it in terms of conceding, because they talk about surrender, but surrender is different to conceding, isn't it? I can surrender for 2 days and then the surrender goes down and I'm back on game again. But conceding is a different level. So, for example, in World War One, the Germans tried to take over Europe, and then the Americans came in and helped out the rest of Europe, and the Germans threw up the white flag and they surrendered. But it didn't stop them coming back 30 years later, trying to do it again in World War Two, because they hadn't conceded to their innermost selves that they was defeated. And it's like that for the addict or for the alcoholic, isn't it? And only at the point where I could concede could I move through to step two, because by having that complete utter deflation of the ego allowed me to be more willing to believe in a power greater than myself. And it was just a willingness at that point as well. I didn't know what I believed in. I didn't believe in God, the man in the sky. I didn't believe in Jesus. I didn't have any spiritual beliefs. It'd never been an interest to me. I don't know if I was an atheist or an agnostic. I don't know what I was. I was just didn't really think about it, didn't really care. But I was advised that in step one, it talks about lack of power. That is your dilemma, Vinny. Lack of power. That is your dilemma. So if lack of power is my dilemma, then I need to find a power greater than myself to replace what I thought was the power, which was the solution that I was using, which was the cocaine. And I threw my hands up and I conceded again in step two. And I truly believe that every step you take from 1 through to 12, ultimately there needs to be I need to concede in each individual step for it to have the effect that it talks about. Because if I'm still holding on to the old threadbare ideas like it talks about, if I'm still holding on to what I believe to be true and to be correct, then I'm not going to get the results that the program clearly offers, because I've seen it in other people around me. I've seen it happening. And then we went into step three, and step three by this point, for me, the first thing that I needed to turn my will over was around the first one, because step one talks about insanity. So if step one's all about insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again, knowing what the result is going to be, but still doing it anyway, pure insanity, then with that, that means that in step two, I'm clearly insane in step one. Do you know what I mean? I'm clearly insane in step one. So in step three, this is my honest experience, but I thought turning my will over to the care of God was just around the first one. And I am convinced today, I know that I cannot safely use like any normal average temperate drinker. I know for a fact I can't. But the further on that I've gone, I've realized that step three isn't just about turning your will over about the first one. It's about turning your will over in the areas of your life that you don't want to turn over: career, finances, relationships, the things I want to do, the things I don't want to do. Do you know what I mean? And that's a really difficult step, because fundamentally, for me personally, every experience I have, if I'm in some form of pain, it's normally because I'm holding on to something in step three, because I don't want to let go of control, because I've got to run the show, And then I went through the process of, 4 to 9, wrote down my fears, resentments, harms, sex conduct, and started to see patterns in my behavior. That's what I seen. I seen patterns in my behavior, and all of a sudden I started waking up to the idea of who I was and what I had become whilst I'm out there smashing my life to bits. It says in step 5, doesn't it, about the within the promises of step 5, we begin to have a spiritual experience in step 5. I don't know the exact word into it, but it says this is where we begin to have a spiritual experience, because we're slowly unblocking to this power. And it's really interesting, and I don't know whether this is just coincidental, but nothing happens in God's world by accident. But the main purpose of the book is obviously to go and have some form of a spiritual experience, a complete personality change, in order to be able to then be useful and to go and help other people. And it says in step 5 that we begin to have a spiritual experience, and you do that through 5, 6, and 7. And then if you look at where the actual spiritual experience reading is in the book, it's on page 567, you know. And I like looking at little things like that where the book lands together. I don't think that's done intentionally because obviously you got the first edition, second, third, and fourth, so the pages move on, but that's where it's landed. Um, I find that really interesting. It still blows my mind to this day when I recognised it. Um, anyway, I went out and started making amends, speaking to people that I'd done harm to, listening to other people's point of views, and keeping this shut. You know, you got two ears and one mouth for a reason because you should listen more than you talk. But I've always been talking more than I listen normally, and that's what got me into this position. I remember I was only about, I think I blasted through the steps on my first occasion when I actually got through the steps this time around in about 18 days, and I was on fire, absolutely rocketed to the fourth dimension of existence, and I made my amends. But then my wife was still unhappy, and she was still sad, and my in-laws couldn't. My relationship with my in-laws just wasn't quite the same. And I was becoming quite deluded with it. And I was like, fucking hell, what's wrong with you lot? Like, why can't you be happy? I'm better now, thinking that I'd cracked it 21 days in. But the reality is, like it says in the book, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead, Vinny. The amends for me isn't just about when I sit down with that person and I look that person in the eye. It's not about that. That is the start of the amends. The amends is continuous for the rest of my life. I have to live up to those expectations, what have been outlaid to me. They're going to watch what I do more than what they're going to watch what I do more than what I actually say I'm going to do. Do you know what I mean? Um, and I've built some, you know, since those amends, I've built incredible relationships with my in-laws, with my wife, and everybody else, you know. Um, but also as well, whilst I've been in recovery, I've been through the steps again, and I've had to go out and make amends that I've caused harm for, clean and sober, because I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be this absolute kind of like just perfect person just because I work a 12-step program, unfortunately, you know. And I think I got disillusioned with that as well when I was quite early in, to be honest. That everyone was talking about how great recovery is, and you know, this is great and that's great, and I'm always feeling amazing. Some days this stuff was a real slog. Some days it still is a real slog. Writing a gratitude list through the grit of my teeth, you know. I still write gratitude lists now. Sometimes I don't because the further on down the road I've gone, I've discovered that gratitude isn't about what I write down on a piece of paper, because there's been countless occasions where I've written a gratitude list and it's not really meant anything. I've just written it for the sake of writing it. It's been a tick boxing exercise. Gratitude is an action. I've got to display it. I've got to feel it. I've got to see it. I've got to experience it, you know. And then I went into, you know, 10, 11, and 12. And it took me a long time to get my head around the inventory process in terms of like on the spot, you know, watching for that selfishness, watching for that dishonesty, watching for that resentment, watching for that fear. And I blocked up again. I blocked up like it talks about because I was unaware that things were piling back up. And all of a sudden, my spiritual condition is starting to be affected, which means that I'm then unable to transmit something that I haven't got in step 12. But what I've always done is I have always been completely honest with myself. It talks about it in the book, and it says that the only people that can't get this is basically the people that are unwilling to be honest with themselves. Because I can be dishonest with my sponsor, I can be dishonest with my fellows, I can be dishonest with my friends, I can keep things to myself. But fundamentally, that's not affecting anybody else around me. The only person that is affecting is me. And that's what I learned that through my own experience by being dishonest in recovery, but then realizing that by doing that, I was only harming myself because it was me that ended up in the pain. And then as a result of that, my family around me start suffering, you know. I've had some I've had some difficult stuff happen in recovery. Um, my daughter's mum was one of us. She was um, she wasn't a part of my daughter's life for a long time. This was from a first experience in terms of a relationship, if that's what you'd call it. Um, and my daughter come to live with me and my wife, and her mum was out there in the madness, and I was the judge, the jury, the executioner. How dare she do this? How dare she treat a daughter like that? How dare she not turn up? How dare she? But at the same time, I was going down that path, but I just couldn't see it. And about 18 months ago, give or take, maybe even close to 2 years ago, she did come back into her life and she was seeing her and so forth. And she dropped her off on the Friday, and on the Monday, she went, I got a phone call from her partner and she passed away. She had a heart attack. And then I had to sit down an 8-year-old girl and explain to her that she's not going to see her mum again. Um, and I had a huge resentment against her mum, huge, because we had a one night affair and she had the baby. And I didn't know how to process that. Not only that, she already had about 6 or 7 kids. Social services was involved in all sorts, and my ego was so big, I couldn't see the truth from the false. You know what I mean? Um, and yeah, where in that moment, because I was working a 12-step program and because I was in fit spiritual condition at the time, I was able to deal with that situation accordingly in the best possible way that I could. I was able to stand up and be accountable. I was able to show compassion. I was able to show empathy towards her mum, towards my daughter, towards her sisters, you know. I wouldn't be able to do that today. I would not be able to do that without working a 12-step program. That would have been like a green light. I wouldn't need an excuse like that to go and use. I wouldn't. Could bang my toe on the stairs, mate, and I'd be off, you know. She had a stepdad as well, who was a big part of her life. And this was, and after her mum passed away, he used to see her on the weekends and stuff. And then I'd say about 8 months ago, same thing happened again. He picked her up on the Friday, on the Monday, had a heart attack and he died. So then I had to do the same process again. So in the space of 2 years, she lost a mum and a stepdad who she loved dearly, you know. And I can, I'm okay with that. Do you know what I mean? That she had a stepdad in her life. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was still out there drinking and using, you know. And yeah, just it was just crazy. It was just crazy. But one thing that I've always plugged into whilst I've been in recovery is working with others. Always work with another addict. Always work with another alcoholic. Because like it says at the beginning, doesn't it? You know, we drink and use essentially because we like the effects produced by alcohol or cocaine. But today I work a 12-step program because I like the effect produced by the spiritual experience. I like the effect produced by working with another addict. I like the effect by being of service. I like the effect of getting some unity together with my fellows. I like the effect of being an accountable husband, accountable father. Um, faith without works is dead, they said, isn't it? You know, faith without works is dead, and how appallingly true. Um, if I'm not working on this stuff, then I'm walking into a relapse. My step one tells me that I will drink and use again. That's what step one is for me personally. I will drink and use again on my own power. So what do I need to do? I need to make sure that I remain in fit spiritual condition by utilizing all of the tools of the program that are laid out in front of me. Yeah. Um, how long have I got, guys? Sorry, I don't. Was that a minute warning there that you flashed up there, mate? Sorry.
1 minute.
Yeah, sorry. Um, so yeah, it's been a bit of a crazy ride so far. Some days I don't want to do this stuff. Some days I'm absolutely flying off, flying in the clouds with it. Um, but one thing that I do always do is that I always make sure that I stay connected with people. I always reach out. I always speak to I always speak to people around me. And I'm not too shy to admit when I'm wrong. And also as well, the biggest key as well is building a relationship with God, whatever that looks like to you, whatever that looks like to me, you know, because there's no human power that's going to relieve my alcoholism or addiction, unfortunately. So may you find him now. And I'll leave it there. Cheers, guys.